All right, so you're going to copy the Mechanic folder to your drive. You're going to change the name where it says your name, and obviously put your actual name. And then you're going to create an animation. So here is an example of a finished animation. Thinking.
I feel like this is a little scary.
Let me turn off my ambient occlusion so that goes a little bit quicker.
You just got a lot of boo for a little bit.
And let me turn off my texture. Maybe that'll make it go quicker. My laptop had no issue playing this.
Well, welcome to the cone.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Oh, Mac like mechanical. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, robot, cool.
I know.
That's what I thought too.
Right, no.
I was thinking.
It's mechanical.
I know, right?
Are we all doing that?
Never
Yes.
Way to get our hopes up, Sean. I'm like, oh, really? Robots are ready? No.
No. All right, so here is what you get with this file is you get a bunch of curves. You can see all these curves that are here. And you get this stuff, and it's basically just an empty thing. So I'm just going to go to the start. That'll be your start file. And all of these curves do something in a way to control this specific item, okay, or parts of this item. So I've labeled them in the outliner so that you know the order that they should be animated in, okay? So if I go to, let's say number 1 here, and I go over to the side, you'll see that there's 2 attributes. One's called tower up, and the other one is tower around. So if I go to tower up and I middle click and drag out here, you'll see that controls this tower going up like that. If I go to the tower around and I animate that to the side, you'll see how it basically like opens up the tower.
Okay, so you can go either up and down or do that?
Well, you would do both, okay? Because it looks cooler if you do both. So if I go here and go like that, both at the same time, we get it going up and going around at the same time. Fancier.
Is that control 1?
That's control 1.
Is attached to.
This building right here.
Okay.
Okay. Now control 2 is tower up and around also, but it's for this piece. Okay, so as I do that, basically I copied the first one and just shrunk it down for that. Tower 3 does the same thing, but it's for the next one. Tower 4 or control 4 does the same thing. Not the same thing, it does this thing and this. So here is that bar. And then it also does this one where it changes the cone's visibility on and off. And does that.
Is the whole shebang right there?
Yep. So if I take all of these off like this, there we go, those are gone. I missed that one right here. There we go. All right, then we have number 5, which is the walls out. So these walls going like this, that's what that does. Now you'll see in this one that the visibility is automatic. So once I hit a certain point, this thing just turns invisible. And the reason for that is I can't have this thing being built with this block sitting right here, because then it obviously loses the illusion of it. So what happens is once that tower is in, then this thing pops in and then it can scale out.
You just put parameters on it?
Yes. The next part of our assignment we'll get into rigging, which you'll see how to make all of this stuff work. Okay. And then we have rollout, which is that. And then I have another rollout, which is the other one. And then I have a walls up, which is this one. Oops. And then I have the stairs.
That's neat.
Okay. So what I want you to do is just starting at number 1, you're going to go through and you're going to animate those parameters. Okay. So you're going to animate tower up and around so that it looks good. Obviously, you don't want this to take forever. My animation, my entire animation was like 240 frames. So your animation shouldn't take 700 or 800 frames for this, it's pretty simple, okay? So, like that, and then you would animate this one, and then you would animate the next one, and then you'd animate the next one. Oops.
Is anything going at the same time, or is it all one by one?
They are all animated with overlap, right? So on mine, I'll show it again, as the tower is getting built, once it hits this first pole, that one starts to build. And then when it hits the second pole, the next one starts to build. As it hits the third pole, the next one starts to build. Okay, and then it pops open. Okay, now again, you have to control things like the visibility, because if I didn't have the visibility on, or if I did have the visibility on for this one, shrink that, there we go. And this is just sitting here, obviously it looks fake, so I have to keyframe obviously the visibility on when it's appropriate, and then animating that, popping out. Okay, and the point of this is I want you to get used to using these controls, because we are going to be using, creating our own controls. So this is number 5. See, and the walls out come right out of the center of this. And then 6 and 7 are essentially the same thing.
Are those supposed to be simultaneous?
No, mine are separate. I'm just doing it to save time.
Yep.
And then here's the walls up. There we go. And then here are the stairs again. Okay, so all you're doing is animating these pieces. All right. Now going back to my example one.
Have you seen the Game of Thrones intro?
That's where this came from.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
It feels like a castle just looking at it.
I'm the only person that really hasn't seen that show.
So we can
Who
make
is?
the Game of Thrones intro?
You haven't seen it?
He's like so offended. Wait, what? Who?
I watched it with my brother one time. It made me uncomfortable. So
Oh,
I
yeah,
didn't
you can't
watch
watch it.
anymore.
Yeah, it's, that would
There
make
you go.
you, it's like trying to watch True Blood with somebody, or just like,
All right, so you can see here as this comes up,
Yeah.
as this thing gets to a certain point, it starts to build all these other pieces. So as it gets here, this is coming out, and then that's coming out, and then that's coming out. Okay, and then when we get to the top of this, that cone that's inside now is visible. We can't see it just pop into existence, and then it plops onto it. Right. And then the walls come out. As the walls are coming out, you can see the stairs are being built. And then after these are out, the little things roll out. And then these little things pop in. Okay? Now, once you have the animation portion, obviously you're going to use the dope sheet and tweak things to get them all lined up so they're nice and neat. For the animation, for the graph editor stuff, all of my graph editor stuff is linear. So I don't believe I have any animation in here. What do I select? There. Okay. I don't believe I have any animation inside here that is not linear. Okay. So in this case, I did not use any easing in and easing out, because what would happen is my stairs, let's say, would start to like slowly pop out, and then in the middle they would rush, and then it would slowly pop out, and it looked really weird. And the same thing with the things rolling out. They would slowly roll out, then go quick, and then slow again. That didn't make sense. So all of this stuff, because of how it's set up, is just linear animation. It's just straight. So I just grabbed everything and clicked that button, as opposed to this, which would ease it in and ease it out. If you see the animation, you can kind of see nothing's happening. There it goes. Come on, update. There it goes. You can see there's a little bit of a hesitation right there. Right? I don't know why it does that. And then same thing there, just it looks weird. So having this at linear makes much more sense. And again, you can see the overlap here. So here's my first animation, here's the second one, here's the third one, here's the fourth one. So they're all kind of overlapping, so that nothing just like starts and stops unless it needs to. Okay? So the animation part's going to be the pretty straightforward part of this. Now the other part that's going to be a little bit tricky to do is the texturing part. So if I go to my stuff here, and I do a little rendering of it, which is off screen, of course. I have to turn my lights back on because I hid them. Lights. Show selection. This, that, this. Now I only have one actual texture that I brought into the scene, and this is the grass. Okay, I wanted the grass or the ground to look more like a grass or ground. So what I did was I took a photo from textures.com, which is basically like an aerial shot of grass. I brought that into Photoshop and made an 8,000 pixel image. And then I put a gradient on the image so that in the center it was brighter and the edges it was darker. That way my grass seems to kind of frame my stuff a little bit better. So this darkness that's back here, part of that is because of the light. The other part is because of my texture that I've chosen. And I repeated this texture enough times that it looks like small grass. So what I didn't do is grab one patch of grass and try to stretch it out over this entire thing. That wouldn't work. It would look ridiculous. My pattern is probably like right here. And it's repeated over this entire thing. So you can't really tell unless, you know, you're really looking at it.
I see nothing.
Oh, never mind. Now the rest of this stuff from here, part of it is color, and then the other part is some sort of bump map. Okay? Now because we're dealing with something that is moving, we can't just throw, number one, we can't really lay out the UVs because of how this thing is set up. Okay? The way that each piece is animated in here wouldn't work for doing UVs. Like some of the pieces don't even have bevels because I can't put bevels on them because of how they're rigged. I don't know what this is doing. But we can do 3D textures. And with 3D textures, what we can do is don't worry about the UVs, drop it on there, and we'll get some sort of texture to it. So all the stuff that's on here, we're getting some grain or some bump or some grit to it. So something like the pits in this wall, that's the kind of stuff we can emulate with a 3D texture without having to worry about laying out the UVs. I'm going to hit escape because I don't know why it's doing that thing. I know why it's doing that thing because it's doing other stuff. So if I zoom in real quick, and I'm going to turn off, I have some other things on here. I'm just going to turn these off. There. So I zoomed in just so we can see these textures, but you'll see that they're not just flat colors, because if I did just flat colors, it would actually be pretty boring. I'll just hit escape. We can see, you know, there is definitely some detail here. It looks kind of junky up close, but when we're further away, it looks pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to go to a new scene just so we can isolate this. So if I create an object in here, like a cylinder, I go and assign a Mila to it, or a Mia, or anything. I use Milas for all my stuff. And I want to add a color, okay? So for all my objects that I have in that scene, I just picked a color. So for now, I'll just choose like that. Like that, there we go, okay. And then I wanted to add a bump map to it. So I went to Material Properties, I went to my bump. Because I'm going to use a 3D texture, I have to go to Utilities and choose Bump 3D. If you use a 2D texture, you would use Bump 2D. I'm using a 3D texture. Then I'm going to click on the map, and I'm going to find a 3D texture. So anything inside of this area, we don't need to worry about laying out the UVs. Okay? So things like, don't use the wood because it looks like junk. Or don't use Mandelbrot 3D, that looks weird, or fluid texture, that's for something else. Most of these I used either rock or granite. Those are the two that seem to work pretty good.
Can we use the 3D textures on the ground?
You can, but there's no UVs on the ground. I mean, the UVs are already laid out.
Right.
It's just a file. You can use it if you want to, just to add some stuff to it, but yeah. So let's say I add rock to this. Okay, so rock is a black and white pattern. So what should happen is that this thing here should be pretty bumpy now. I have to render this through Mental Ray. There we go. All right, so now we have, instead of just being a flat material, we have some actual grit to it. Now I should also add to this maybe a reflective plastic and then adjust some of that parameter. Take that roughness up. Okay. And that'll help the bump read a bit better. There we go. I mean, it's not much to it, so it's just that. Okay. So I can hit the back button here. I can lower my bump, whatever. Okay, so now it's a bit softer. It still has some grit and grain to it. All right.
Change the bump to 4.
I'll change it to 4.
Change it.
And I'll turn the texture on here so we can see it.
Now we're talking. What's life without the risk?
Right, there we go. Gorgeous.
That'll work.
Yep. Okay, so now here's our issue with dealing with 3D textures. So the way that 3D textures work, and the reason I want to bring this up is because we're dealing with animation, and the 3D textures have an issue with animation. 3D textures don't need UVs laid out because it's basically like an aquarium, okay? Where that texture is basically floating in outer space or floating in our world. So what that means is I'm going to pick a different 3D texture that's a bit more obvious just so you can see it. And I'm going to assign it to the color just so, again, it's a bit more obvious. So something like crater, really obvious. Okay? So with this, I'm going to render it. We'll see how it looks. Okay. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to just nudge it over. Oops.
What could you actually use that for?
Nothing.
You could use it for stuff. I've used it for like Rust. What?
You can use it
For planets?
Games
And then the sun.
19...
Yeah. Because you can change the colors of it.
Gotcha.
Right, you can change the colors of those.
What in the...
Okay. So now I've moved this surface over a little bit, and what I want you to see is that the texture changed. So look here, see this pattern is pretty distinct. As I move this over, that pattern is no longer here. It's actually like up here now or over here. Okay? Because these are essentially inside of this aquarium, as I move my object around, it's going to pick up a different part of that texture. So imagine that you've animated your entire scene. My scene was taking 12 plus hours to render, and it did it completely wrong and I have to start back over. But imagine you did 12 hours and you didn't pay attention, and all your textures are what's called swimming. They're basically just floating around.
Is there a way to lock them to the object?
Yes, I will show that in a second. I want to show first.
Go for it. Charlie, I think.
Yeah, I want to show let's see. That was my favorite video for a long time. Okay, so this is an example of a swimming texture. This is your objects are moving through a texture.
That's fun though.
If you animated it out like that, is that what it would make?
Right. If I animated this thing and rendered it out, it would look like that, where basically the object is moving around and these textures are staying still. Okay? So for this item, I have to do this. I have to go to my rendering menu. I have to go to render, texturing, and I have to do a texture reference object. Okay? Once I've done that, whatever texture was on there is now locked to those vertices. So if I scoot this back here, I save my image, and I render it again, that texture should be locked. Okay, and you can see this distinct pattern right here. As I scoot it back, it's still right there, very distinct, locked in. Okay, so now we know if we use a 3D texture, we have to use a texture reference if it's animated. Okay, now the problem we get to in our scene, how many objects are animated? A lot of objects, okay?
About 1 maybe.
Did you make this?
Yes. Look at that. So here is everything. So if we look at this scene, all of these pieces are animated. So my stairs are animated. All of these little things coming out here are animated. This is animated. This is animated. This is animated.
You get an animation.
So now it would be nice if a feature inside of Maya allowed us to do this, which is grab everything and go to texturing and say create texture reference object, and it does it for everything. It does not.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say that.
Right, it does not. So if I click this, what it does is it makes the one object a texture reference object. That's it. Like the first object I clicked on, it makes it a texture reference object. So it doesn't help me out, right? So what I have to do is I'm going to go and delete my texture references. Every time you make a texture reference, it makes a copy of it in here. So all of these things are my references.
Screen wipes?
Nope.
No idea.
Let me delete these. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to grab all my geometry, and inside of this folder is a script. Okay, so inside the scripts folder is this little script. So this script basically will go through and it'll grab the item and it will create a texture reference for it, then move on to the next item. Okay, so if you copy it, you open up your script editor and you paste it here and hit Control Enter. It should do it. Now there is going to be an error in it. Okay, and I left the errors in here because I want you to see these things so that you know how to troubleshoot them. So this one says ground platform left cone 10, ground platform left 15 exists. It says it's already there. So in your outliner, there's a geo tab. I'm going to hold shift and open it up. So here's all the objects that are inside here. Okay. Now if you do these all at once, you get the error. If you don't, if you don't do that, you don't get the error. So I'm going to grab this one here, shift click down here, highlight the whole thing, Control Enter, run the script. No error. Grab this one, shift click that one, Control Enter. Oops, I do get an error. Ground platform 2 right. Okay, so it says this one already exists, which I'm not sure why it thinks that. So I'll just rename this. Okay, so I'm going to grab all of those and just rename them. And look how easy it is to rename. Up here at the top, you may have to expand some things, but I can change this to rename. I can give this a thing, G platform R. And it automatically renames everything correctly. So now I can go into this and run it. And if it still gives me grief, I'll just grab half of them and do that, and then grab the other half and do that. There we go. I don't know why it was still acting up. There we go. And so this is going through and building a make reference beacon shape 9. Making a texture reference for each one of these items. Oh, I already have those ones. That's why it's giving me the error. Okay, so I just keep going through each one of these items that's a polygon.
So this is, like, you do this, it creates references at the bottom?
Correct.
Okay.
And you do this typically at the end. So after all your texturing is done, right before you render, you go ahead and do that. And then by the time you're done, you'll get these wireframes all over everything. So when you rewind, everything is still there. Okay? And then whatever position your object was in when you created it, it automatically locks it into that's where it is, right? So if the object is here and you lock it, I can't move the texture again unless I go through and delete that texture reference and then remake it, okay? So you don't need to see it. It doesn't actually render this out at all. So I can just grab all the stuff here and just Control H to hide it or group it, throw it on a layer or whatever. Okay? So obviously this will be important because if you don't do it, your stuff is going to swim and it's going to look weird. Especially when we get into some of the later ones where we have like, we're going to do a organic object like a fish. And if that fish is swimming and the textures and everything are kind of swimming through, that might look weird. Okay, so once that's done, then I just do the rest of my stuff the same way. So give it a name, open EXR, start and end, pick my cameras. Go to your quality, crank that up, motion blur, full, and that should be good. Okay, render it out. You don't need to do a play blast for this one. You just need to do the actual rendering. I should be able to see everything in that rendering. All right, shouldn't take too long because it's pretty, I made one texture for all this stuff, one texture for the rings, one texture for this and the stairs. Shouldn't take that long. And then obviously some textures or some lights inside the scene. Oh, also these little platforms here. But they're all basically the same thing. It's just the same texture, different color.
So we're only allowed to use like a couple of the 3D stuff. Like most of the other ones don't work.
What do you mean?
3D texture.
Oh, the 3D textures? No, because what's going to happen is they're going to streak. And just so you can see it, like on this guy here, let's say I'm just going to throw a surface shader on so we can see it. If I put a checkerboard on him, and I'll isolate him so I don't see anything else. Where's my isolate button? Right there. All right, so when we rewind this and hit play, see how it like stretches that out? So it looks kind of weird how it's stretching that out. And then on other items, it just won't do anything. See, like these, it's really streaky. This one is not even laid out. Oops.
But what about the 3D textures?
The 3D textures don't have to worry about it.
Well, you said we could use a couple of them or something?
Oh, a couple of those. Yeah. Don't use like this one because it's not meant for 3D texturing. It has a very specific purpose. So does the fluid 3D texture. I've never played with that. You can try it if you want. And then the wood one sucks. All the other ones are up for grabs. Snow I wouldn't really use. It's a specialty one too, just so we can see what snow does. It has two colors, snow and surface color. So if I were to render it like this, oh wait, wait. All right. So looking at that, how did it pick what to color white and what to color red? The tops are all white. Okay. So if you were actually trying to create something like dust on a piece of furniture, or you're trying to create wear on a surface, you could use this to say everywhere it's red, not facing up, it's going to have these kind of streaks or this kind of whatever pattern. Everything that's facing up would have a different kind of pattern. So it's very cool how you can use some of these things like that.
If you were to use that, can you make like the red a texture?
Yeah. Everything that has a checkerboard, you can add texture to it. So there's checkerboard.
We had a 3D texture. We had the castle in the snow.
Right. Now a solid fractal. And let's go back to this one and click that. And then this one will be
Who's fancier?
cloud. Hopefully Maya won't die on me.
I think you broke it.
No, it's still processing. It's trying to figure out what it's supposed to look like.
You've gone too far.
There we go. So let's go back to the surface color. I can even go down to effects and say insert a color ramp, and then give this colors. And again, it's trying to think of what it's supposed to look like.
Let's shave hair.
For RenderMan, it's to add coloration for hair, like Maya has Maya hair. I'm gonna go here, pull this down, like that. Fancy. And then two, because everything is a 3D texture, if you have two objects that are close to each other have the same 3D texture, that texture will blend into the other one. So in this case, in this instance, it doesn't really happen or apply too much, but sometimes you may want to offset them, create their 3D texture reference, and then bring them together, just so it doesn't look like they're the exact same texture. So that would look weird. It looks a lot better here.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's your next assignment. Once you're onto the ball and you're rendering it out, then you can start messing with this guy. Okie dokie. Next week we have our hotkey test and we have our definitions test. Study for your hotkeys, study for your definitions.
Was it one Monday,
I
one
know it's
Wednesday?
not right.
Yes, hotkeys are Monday, definitions are Wednesday. Both are on Canvas, so make sure you've gone through and you can actually get to Canvas. Cool?
As in you take the test on Canvas?
As in you can get to my class in Canvas. So if you can get to my class in Canvas, you should be good.